On behalf of United Way of the National Capital Area and the entire staff, welcome to Project Community Connect. I'm Stephanie Crane, the Director of Community Impact and Engagement, and we're very excited to have you here with us today. So United Way NCA has expanded its annual Project Homeless Connect in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to align with its strategic programmatic direction focused on achieving equity for all of our community members, regardless of race, gender, income, and ability. We're excited to work with our partners and community-based organizations on PCC's mission to build community, shift mindsets through personal experience and connection. We want to provide critical resources at no cost to individuals and families in the DMV. We're going to have a series of workshops this week, including things such as healthy eating on a budget, preparing to buy a home, and starting a small business. In this time of COVID, there is no segment of the population that has not been touched by this public health crisis, particularly those households who struggle to afford basic needs and necessities such as childcare, transportation, food, and even basic smartphone plans. In these unprecedented times, it is imperative that your United Way provide resources to families in the DMV. Today, I'm so fortunate to be joined by Jimmie Jones from Truist to bring you budgeting and saving during a crisis. We're going to discuss the tools you need to assemble a crisis budget and provide you with valuable takeaway resources to help you and others. It is a pleasure to be here with you today to bring you this much needed workshop. And with that, please help me welcome Jimmie Jones, Vice President, Community Development Manager at Truist. Jimmie is an accomplished community banker, former entrepreneur and small business advocate, and after a 4-year stretch in Houston, Texas as Community Business Development Officer with BB&T, Jimmie returned to the DC area with his family in early 2020. Jimmie brings a world of banking and private sector experience to his role as Community Development Manager in the greater Washington, DC area. In addition to his 16 years of service with BB&T, he also ran a community development financial institution in Jacksonville, Florida, and managed lending services at an affordable housing developer in the Baltimore, Washington region. While Jimmie is an El Paso, Texas native, he considers DC his adopted home as he's lived here for almost 20 years. We're so excited to have Jimmie with us today, so please help me welcome him. Jimmie, thank you.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for budgeting and savings in a crisis. Today, we're going to discuss a lot of great concepts and ideas around how to manage your money. And you may have had a budgeting class before, but this one's going to be a little different because we are talking about managing your money during a crisis. So some of the concepts that might be familiar with you are going to be changed around a little bit because this is truly about just kind of surviving and getting through. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll go to the next slide. And let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So we're going to cover really 6 areas. We'll start with why a budget is important, and we'll go over, again, the concept from both in and out of a crisis, because budgeting can be used universally throughout your life. Second, we'll talk about how to create a crisis budget. Then we're going to take a look at expenses versus income, and we'll define what an expense is, and then we'll get into how to manage both income and expenses, because you do have some flexibility on both. Then the last couple of areas we'll talk about are resources that are available to you to help manage through this crisis and just budgeting in general. And then 6, what lies ahead in the near future. So let's start with, why is budgeting important? And the truth of the matter is, whether you're in a crisis or not, planning is a critical part of both survival and success. And I'm going to read every now and then from the slides, things that are important. And this one I like because it lets you know that budgeting allows you to have a solid understanding of your financial situation. And that understanding allows you to make informed decisions about your money and to prioritize your spending and savings. And that's really, you're going to see what this is all about, is prioritizing. Crisis times call for crisis management, and crisis management is always about prioritizing, taking care of what's most important first, and then everything else kind of follows after that. And the nice thing is, even though we're talking about crisis budgeting, these principles that you learned today, you can be carried with you into the future in good times and in bad. So with that, we'll move forward, and we'll start with talking about how to create your crisis budget. Now, if you are familiar with traditional budgeting, you think about, okay, I've got, my money coming in. The idea with the traditional budget is to earmark all those dollars that you have coming in, to put them in the right place. You want to make sure you also have money set aside for savings or any future expenses. But in a crisis, when you are making a budget during a crisis, that usually means that your income has stopped or maybe has been greatly reduced. And that makes it different from the regular budgeting. And in this case, instead of starting with your income and budgeting every dollar, we're going to actually determine what is the minimum I need to survive. And then you got to do all you can to find enough money or income to cover all of those necessities. And if there is some money left over, you have some extra money, we're going to work towards saving that for future months, because it's pretty uncertain times and you just don't know from one month to the next what might happen. So next slide, please. So first, let's talk about what is an expense. An expense, simply stated, is money that's going out. It's money that you have to spend daily, weekly, monthly, or maybe even yearly. When we talk about budgeting during a crisis and getting ready to manage our money, we want to take a look. Crisis, remember, we're going to start with expenses. And with expenses, there's two kinds. There's fixed expenses and there are variable expenses. We'll start with the fixed first. And what that means by fixed is usually these are expenses that do not change in terms of dollar amount from one month to the next. For instance, your rent. If your rent is $2,100 a month in January, most likely your rent's going to be $2,100 a month in February, March, April, May, June, on through the end of your lease. So that is a fixed expense. The amount does not change from month to month. Then you have to figure out, okay, is this an essential expense? Is this a must-have, something that I can't live without? I would say your housing expense, either your rent or your mortgage, is definitely a must-have, right? You need a place to live. Health insurance. If you are fortunate enough to be covered, health insurance is very important. And I know this one gets a little touchy because some people say, oh, it's not absolutely necessary, especially during a crisis. Well, let's take a step back and think about what this crisis is. It is a medical crisis right now. COVID-19 affects your health. So health insurance in this perspective is a must-have, because if you get sick, you need help, right? It truly is a life and death situation. So health insurance, at least during this crisis, is a must-have expense. Then, of course, life insurance, we don't like to think about it, but it's really the same idea. If something happens and you have loved ones, you want to make sure they're taken care of and not struggling to get through the day-to-day. If you are working or if you're in an area where you don't have access to reliable transit, car insurance is a must-have, right? If you have a car, you have to have insurance. It's required in most states by law. And heaven forbid, if that car is in an accident during a time like this, you need insurance to help cover the cost to get that vehicle repaired. And then if there's any other fixed expenses that are must-haves that you can think of, they would also go on a chart like this. Next slide, please. All right. Now we have variable expenses that are must-haves. And if you think about, well, what is a variable expense? This is an expense that could change in dollar amount from month to month. We still want to consider essentials, so things that must have, like electricity, like gas. Nowadays, you really can't get by without having a phone, and in most cases, a cell phone at that. So a cell phone becomes a must-have. But many of these things, the price from one month to the next can vary, right? Electricity, the more you use, the more you pay. The less you use, the less you pay. So that dollar amount can change from month to month. Gas for your car, that can change from month to month. You know, during the crisis, if you were lucky enough to be able to work from home, your gas expense probably went down for your vehicle because you didn't have to drive as much. Clothing, this is a big one. You know, It is a must-have if you have a job where you have to work in front of people. You've got to be out in a presentable format. But there are ways to control that, especially in a crisis time. You want to hang on to as much as you can, as long as it looks good and is in good repair. But these are all just examples of variable expenses that are must-haves. And we show this in a chart format because when you're going through the process, you want to use a chart like this. You want to actually write down these items and fill in these columns because it's going to help you later when you make those financial decisions. Now, we've talked about must-have expenses, right? We've talked about fixed and variable. Now we're going to talk about debt and what I call life management, also referred to as a sanity expense, because, in reality, this crisis has been very difficult on everyone from a mental perspective. So it's okay to build into your crisis budget something that just gives you an opportunity to give you some downtime, let your brain relax. There's so much going on. There's so much stress and drama in the world right now. It's okay to have a little something in your budget just to help you relax, but it can't be too extravagant or too expensive, right? So first, we're going to look at those debt expenses. What's debt? It's money that you owe to someone, and it's relatively, can be something that's long term. So, for instance, a car loan. If you have a car and you still have a loan on that car, that's a debt, right? And most people that have a car need a car. So it's something that you're going to have to work on making sure that you pay each month. So that auto loan is going to go in here under debt. Student loans. If you have a student loan, same thing, it is a debt. It is a federal debt. So student loans you have to be careful with because, a lot of people, you don't want to pay them, especially if you're years out of school. It's really an annoyance, but defaulting on a federal debt is a really big deal. Now, the good thing is during this crisis, there have been a lot of accommodations made for student loans. So if you have a student loan and you have some issues with it, you can call your servicer, let them know, hey, COVID-19 has affected my income situation. I need a little help. And usually you can get that help. Plus, there's some things I think that's working their way through Congress, and if they pass, there may be some relief on student loans as well. Other debts, credit cards, and other items, you want to record those here, but we'll see a little bit later, there may be some flexibility in those items. And then just real quick, under life management expenses, again, that's that sanity thing. Give yourself a treat. If you have all of the streaming services, Hulu, Netflix, YouTube, you probably need to cut that down to one, Disney Plus. If you have kids, maybe you keep the Disney. But you do want to give yourself a treat, but let's not go overboard. Try to pick one that you really like and keep that. So after you've worked your way through the expenses, you've done the fixed must-haves, the variable must-haves, the debt, and then your life management expenses. We carry them over to this chart and we total everything up. You want to total it by week, by month, and by year. That way you have an idea, okay, this is my total monthly outflow. And we can go to the next slide. So now that we know what we're spending monthly or what is due each month, really, now is where sort of the hard work comes into play. In order to reduce expenses, you're going to have to take a look at what are my needs versus what are my wants. And when you do that for needs, try trimming back some of the necessary needs. Look for coupons to save on necessities. We're going to talk about bartering in just a few minutes, things you can do without spending cash to get what you need. On the want side, take a look at your unnecessary spending and try to cut those either completely out or reduce them greatly. Take inventory on your automatic payments, even consider stopping them so that you can manage every dollar. And this is a tough one because, a little bit of a personal share here. I had financial difficulties early on in life coming out of college. I was in a lot of debt. And one of the ways it helped get me out of some of the bad spending habits I had was putting everything on automatic payments. When you have an automatic payment set up out of your account, you know that your bills are going to be paid. It's up to you to manage your account to make sure the money is there, but that certainly helps you in building or rebuilding your credit. So this idea of taking stuff off of automatic payment is a tough one for me, especially if you're someone who's gone through credit difficulties, gotten back on track, and now you're in a situation where things are getting difficult again. But remember, this is crisis management. So is it possible your credit score could take a hit? Yes, it is possible. But if that's what you need to do to get through so that all of your other necessities are paid, like your rent, your car, your insurances, then so be it. That's something that, it's a sacrifice that you might have to make. One tip too on credit cards and debt and things like that, even though after 30 days you're technically late with that company, you've really got about another 20 days or so to get a payment in before it gets reported to credit bureaus. So that's something you can think about as well as you're looking at ways to sort of manage your money from one month to the next. Maybe you alternate which bills get paid. As long as you don't hit that 60-day late mark, you can actually save your credit. The lender may not like it so much. They may charge you late fees, but that is something that might be available to you. And just real quick on the need side, can you cut back on your cell phone bill? Do you have the unlimited data with unlimited text and talk right now? Maybe that can be scaled back. You might need the unlimited text and talk. Maybe you can work on reducing that data package, or maybe reducing some of the extra features with your phone during this time. Same thing with groceries. If you're a person that loves the brand name stuff, now would be the time to maybe look at some generics, just to get you through, reduce that grocery expense. Next slide, please. So, and we just talked about this actually. How can you cut expenses? I mentioned the cell phone plan, going from one of the more expensive plans down to a basic or less expensive plan for a while. Cars. Now the crisis has created a unique issue here. If you've got a very expensive car, maybe you can look at getting rid of that and trading down to a less expensive car. Or if you have two cars, especially if you're not driving as much, maybe you can get rid of one. Well, the crisis has caused an interesting problem. Right now, used cars are in high demand. So if you've got a vehicle that you can sell, now is a great time to do it. But on the flip side, if you need to buy a vehicle, let's say you're trying to trade down to a less expensive car, that's hard because inventory is low, especially on new cars. It's almost impossible. And with used cars, because the market is so strong, it's hard to get a really good deal. So that one's a little tricky. On utilities, again, look at switching down, if possible, to a more basic plan. And two, on utilities like gas and electricity, there are fixed payment plans that you can work out with them. So if your bill varies a lot, especially when seasons change, when you go from hot to cold or cold to hot, your bills tend to spike as your air conditioner or heater has to work harder. But you can talk to them about getting on a payment plan where your monthly payments stay the same during the summer and winter months. So that's another option to you. And then again, on the grocery bill, look at generics, look at coupons, drink more water, because water, generally speaking, is free, or at least is cheaper than sodas. And this is a time where you could use this to think of other areas that you might be able to cut expenses. So this chart, I know it may be hard to read because it's in pretty small print, but now that you've gone through all of your expenses, your necessities, your variables, things that you might be able to wiggle around on a little bit, you've totaled them all up, you've looked at things that you can cut or maybe reduce. This chart is sort of a summary of all of that. This is where you can say, okay, what are my costs that I can cut or eliminate? And notice that there's columns for non-crisis versus crisis. And this is where I was saying early on, you can use this information later on in life. When we get out of this crisis, you can still use this information to help manage your money better. So if it's in the non-crisis column, Right now, that's probably not something that you can use because we are in the middle of a crisis. If you are fortunate enough that your income has not been interrupted and you're doing just fine, by all means, use that column. But the crisis one is really the one that you want to look at. And this is where you can put in, the new numbers in the crisis column, which you think you can reduce that cost down to. And then see at the very bottom, it has total expenses. Hopefully you will have been able to reduce that from the total expenses that we saw earlier on with our must-haves and variables and things like that. So this is just really a summary to help you see your progress, see where you've been. And you can actually also use the non-crisis column to record what your expenses were before you started this, and then the crisis column to look at what your expenses are after you've made some attempts at reducing or things in your mind that you can do. Then you get the side-by-side comparison. So let's talk about other things you can do to reduce expenses. Another option you may have, if you have some debt, is looking at deferring your payments. Right now, all of the lenders out there understand that this crisis has created interruptions in a lot of people's lives and income. So making that phone call if you're having difficulty and saying, I'm having problems right now paying my bills. Is there any way we can defer some of my payments? And defer simply means that you might be able to delay making your monthly payments for 2 months, 3 months, something like that. These payments don't go away. You're not skipping them. You're just delaying them. So you'll still have to make those payments eventually, but this can help buy you some time, help you manage through a difficult period. And you see in the slide, it says the amount delayed will be delayed to the end, until the end of your loan. And you got to make sure too on your end that you keep track of those payments so that you know what to expect in the future. The banks will do that for you, but it's always good to double check for yourself, just so in case there's a mistake made, you've got your own records and you can go to bat to protect yourself. So we talked about expenses, and remember, this is crisis budgeting, so it's kind of in reverse order. We went through expenses first. Now we're going to talk about income. So you know the money that's going out. You've identified what you absolutely must pay each month. Now we're going to talk about, well, what do you have coming in? You know what your total expenses are. How much do I have coming in each month? So we'll start with something that I hope everyone was able to maintain, but I understand, if not, regular income. We'll start with this. Are you working right now? If so, you would put in your full-time, part-time, or whatever. Maybe you're driving Uber. Whatever income you have, you want to fill that in on this chart. And then again, weekly, monthly, and yearly. Those columns are all available. And quite honestly, it's tough right now from a work perspective. On the news and the stories you're hearing, oh, everybody's hiring. It should be easy to find a job, but the truth of the matter is it's not easy, especially if you have children or if you have people around you that are susceptible to serious illness. So all those factors come into play. I understand, everybody's hiring, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every job is the right job for you. But don't give up. Don't give up. The right job will come along. And these employers, as they see, oh, we're not getting these positions filled, maybe they'll make the necessary changes to make that job more appetizing for you to fit the needs that you have. But aside from that, so this is where your regular income goes, but we're also going to talk about other things you can do to create income or maybe create a way to purchase the products and services that you need without using your cash. So we'll go to the next slide. And here we go. Income, get creative with how you make your money or how you bring your money in. As it says on the slide, it's time to hustle, right? So think about some things you can do to make a little extra money. If you have a car, if you have a car, you can look at things like grocery stores, these grocery delivery services, the grocery picking services, Instacart, Safeway, Giant, in pretty much any grocery store now that you can think of, they have programs available to people that don't want to come into the store. So they hire somebody from Instacart or from Safeway or from Giant to do their grocery shopping for them. They do it through an app. They need people to go pick these items, bag them up, and then deliver them to the customer. So that is an extra way for you to make a little extra money if you've got a vehicle. If you don't have a vehicle, you still may want to check with Instacart or some of these others to see if you can just be the person in store that's picking the items and bagging them up, and then somebody else can deliver. If you're fortunate enough to have a car, you can also look at shipping and delivery services like Amazon, UPS. They hire private vehicles to do things like food delivery. Some of them even hire private people to do package delivery, especially on the weekends or on holidays. So if you have a car, there's another option for you. Online learning organizations and remote meeting companies like Zoom, Slack, Microsoft Teams, all those companies are really, really hot right now, right? And they need a lot of people to work. And because a lot of them are digital, you can work from home. So those are things to keep in mind. Just in general, a good idea is to think of what's in demand right now and how you can participate in working with those companies to meet that demand. Holiday time is coming up. If you're able to get out and work in the public, if there's no health concerns or restrictions there, now is going to be a great time to find some temporary seasonal employment. And then last, of course, think about your friends and family. What can you do for them? You have friends or family that have children that need a babysitter or impromptu daycare. You might be able to do that and receive some payment for that. So again, just like before with the expenses, all of our ideas, we want to make sure that we're getting them down on paper. So this is just another sample chart that you can use to record, your ideas for income. If you have these things available to you and you know what the dollar figures are, you can put them in here. But see at the bottom again, total creative income. It's the same concept as expenses. We're going to total all those numbers up and see where we fall out. So next slide. So another way to create income, and this can be an interesting one, but selling possessions. Maybe if you're like me, you have a bunch of stuff that's been sitting around your house for a very long time that you keep saying, oh, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of that. Well, now is a great time to get rid of it. There are lots of apps like OfferUp, Facebook, Marketplace. It's very easy to put stuff up for sale that you want to move, right? It's like having a digital garage sale. So if you have some stuff that you can sell that you don't need anymore, list them on the internet, and you can get some money from that. Especially if you've got old TVs, maybe an old computer, beds, cribs. If your child is grown up now, there's lots of different options there. But this is just another idea for creating income. Now, I do want to talk about non-cash income, the idea of bartering or trading. Everybody's got their own set of skills, and you may be able to trade your skills for another goods or service without having to use your cash. Remember earlier I mentioned childcare, daycare. Depending on the laws in your state, you may not be able to charge someone money to take care of their kids. But if it's a family member, or if you are doing babysitting services, especially for someone who might work at a grocery store or may work somewhere where you could use the services that they have, you could offer, hey, I'll take care of your son or daughter after school. In exchange, though, do you think you could trade me out a couple of bags of groceries or something like that? Just that's something you have to work on your own. But think about, what are your skills and talents that someone else might need, especially in this digital era. If you know people that are self-employed and they do things that are computer related, their volume has gone up tremendously. So they may need someone just to answer their phones and take messages, basically be a remote answering service. If you can do that, that's something that you may be able to barter or trade, right? They can pay you either cash to do that, or maybe they have some service that they can offer to you that will offset and reduce some of your expenses. Next slide. So Others examples, what can you barter? What can you trade? I mentioned the babysitting or childcare. What about cooking? Are you a good cook? Lots of people are very busy now. Cooking is something that they don't have time for, or the people that are working from home, the kids are at home. It's a whole lot going on all the time. And sometimes, you just don't have time to put together a decent meal. So that's something else you could look at. If you're a good cook, maybe you offer, hey, I can make dinner a couple times a week in exchange for, your help with resume building or something like that, whatever the case may be. Same thing. Can you sew? Are you skilled at fixing things? These are all services that you can offer. And, people will pay you cash to do it, or maybe they'll trade you something else for it. So after all these ideas, you've gotten them written down on paper. Hopefully you've been able to figure out how much money you can bring in from some of these extra activities or trade, barter activities. Same idea. You want to get them written down on this chart. And in the end, what you'll have from the previous work is your total expenses after you've made reductions. On here, you have your total income after you've made all of your, creative side hustle items. Get your total income, and then we'll show you what to do next. Now you can do your budget, right? We know exactly what you need to cover each month. We know exactly what you're bringing in or what your potential to bring in is from some of the additional work that you might be able to find. So now it's time to figure out, am I at a deficit or am I at a surplus? So deficit just means that your expenses are still greater than your income, which is a tough place to be in, right? Or maybe you're at a surplus where you actually have money left over after your expenses have been paid. And this chart here will help you identify it. And it's pretty simple. It's the work you did earlier, your total expenses go on the top. Then the work you just most recently did, your total income goes on the next line. And you subtract your expenses from your income. If you have a negative number, you're at a deficit. If you're at a positive number, then you're in a good spot and you can actually move some money toward savings for future months in case things get rough. So that really covers the whole idea of budgeting during a crisis and the steps to take to figure out, what you have to cover versus what you have in to cover all those items. And in the end, it gives you a nice summary of, am I at a positive or a negative each month, each week? And then my advice to you would be, if you are still at a negative after you've made all those changes, there's more work to be done, right? You're either going to have to look at managing more of your expenses, reducing them more, or look at more ways to bring in income. And if it's reducing expenses, that's where you can bring in some of these tips of working with your creditors or alternating payments monthly, to try to ease up on your cash flow. But that's, this exercise will give you a good view as to where you currently are. So we're going to talk about resources, things to help you, give you more ideas and help you manage through. So on the next slide, please. So at Truist, we have a program called On Up. It's a digital budgeting, or it's a digital money management program, really. It's something that you can do online. There's a lot of great tips, great trainings in there that help you with managing your money. All of it is free. There's no charge to do these things. But if you like what you saw today about budgeting during a crisis, that whole presentation is available for you online, as well as some other tips. YouTube actually has some really great tips around saving money from a grocery shopping perspective, coupon cutting, things like that. So if you have access to that, check that out. Just, Google tips on saving money with groceries, things like that. That's another great digital resource. And then, of course, you've got the United Way. Additional resources that are government related. There's the USA.gov/coronavirus. That gives you the latest information on what the federal government is doing with crisis relief. It also talks about student loan deferment, financial aid, things like that. There's the CDC.gov. Again, gives you the latest on what's going on with the virus, including any new relief efforts or updates on mandatory vaccines, masks, things like that. And then if you are an entrepreneur, if you are a business owner, the Small Business Administration, the SBA, they have their own relief programs, and some of them are forgivable, such as the PPP program. There's a disaster relief loan, and COVID-19 is considered a disaster, so you're eligible for a very, very low interest rate long-term loan, with really great terms. If you are a business owner and you have your paperwork, your finances together, it's a wonderful resource for you as well. And that concludes the presentation for me today. I thank you all so much for your time, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jimmie. It's been a pleasure to have you here with me today. Partnerships as the one we have with Truist are critical to improving the work, moving it forward to ensure that your United Way can meet the needs of community, and that together we can provide the best and most needed resources for the region. Thank you for attending today's workshop. To learn more about what United Way is doing to mobilize and make bold strides until we achieve equity for all of our community members, regardless of race, gender, income, and ability, please visit unitedwaynca.org/PCC. Again, that's unitedwaynca.org/PCC. Again, thank you so much. And Jimmie, thank you for being here today. It was an honor and a privilege.